In this video, we want to talk about PyCharm debugging tools, or let's say PyCharm Debug in Python programming language, and we are going to cover a lot of stuff, a step into, a step over, a step into my code, a step out, and also we are going to cover watches and evaluate expressions and a lot of stuff available in PyCharm debugging tools. And as a matter of fact, to my opinion, it's a very complete tutorial about PyCharm debugging tool. So please stay tuned. Now let's talk about this example. As you can see here, we are printing some statements, print statement 1 all the way up to print statement 8. And now suppose that we want to debug the code. We want to run the code step by step and see what's going on. In order to do so, we need to use something called debug or debugger tool. And the first step is to define a breakpoint, and then we are going to use the debugger tool. And what do I mean by breakpoint? When I put a breakpoint, for example, at some line, for example, let's define a breakpoint at this line, and I'm going to tell you how to put that breakpoint, but please wait a minute. When I put a breakpoint at that line, it means that the running process is going to be braked at that line. So this is called breakpoint. It means a point in our program that the running process is going to be stopped at that point. Is going to be braked at that point. So that's why it is called breakpoint. So in order to define a breakpoint, first of all, remember that this margin is called gutter. And if you want to put a breakpoint, for example, at this line, you can simply click on the gutter in this line. And if you want to remove that, you can simply click on it again, so you can see it has been removed. But if you want to put that, you can define that as well. And also remember that we can have different breakpoints, which we are going to cover in this video. But now let's talk about one breakpoint. And we are going to cover multiple breakpoints by the end of the video as well. And now remember that when you put the breakpoint in this line, I mean, for example, here in this example, in line 6, and when you debug the code, it is going to run all the stuff from the first line all the way up to the line before this breakpoint. And also remember that in PyCharm, you shouldn't put the breakpoint in the first line. And maybe you ask what's the reason. I'm going to talk about that by the end of the video, but for now, let's talk about this breakpoint, which we have put in this line. So after putting the breakpoint in this line, we want to debug the code. So in the middle of the editor, right click on it, and then click debug temp. Temp is the name of my code. As you can see, the name of my code is temp.py. So it says debug, and this is the name of my code. So I want to click on this, and you can see the debugging window will be opened. And as you have noticed, the console has blinked. And the console tab, when the console tab blinks, it means that something has happened in the console. So let's click on that. And as you can see, it has printed a statement 1, a statement 2, and a statement 3. So let's see a statement 1, a statement 2, and a statement 3. And the reason is because we have braked the running process at this line, which is line 6. And as you can see in line 6, we are printing a statement 4. So as I have told you, when you put a break line, it is going to run from the beginning all the way up to the line before the breakpoint. So as you can see, it has run this line, and also this line, and also this line, but not this line. So it is going to run from the beginning all the way up to one line before the breakpoint. So that's it. But now we want to continue the running process, and we want to step over, or let's say we want to run step by step. So in order to do so, we can press F8 on our keyboard to run step by step. So let's press F8, or also we can simply click on this step over. As you can see, the keyboard shortcut is F8. So we are going to step over each line of this code. So let's press F8, or you can simply click on this icon. So let's press F8. So as you can see, statement 4 has been executed, and it is highlighting this line. And when the PyCharm highlights a line, it means that the forthcoming line for running is this line. It means it is going to run this line if you press F8. So the forthcoming line for running is this line. So let's press F8 in order to print statement 5. So let's press F8, or you can simply click on this icon. And as you can see, statement 5 has been executed. Let's press F8 again, statement 6, and again statement 7, and again statement 8. And that's it. And because we have reached to the end of the program, you can see that the debug has been finished and the debug process has been stopped. So you can see that it has been stopped and it has been finished. And now let's take another example, which I'm going to explain what this code is doing. So let's first of all define a breakpoint at this line. And once again, I should notice that you shouldn't put the break line at the first line. And I've told you that I'm going to explain about the reason by the end of the video, but now let's put the breakpoint in this line. So let's right click in the editor and click on the debug. And as you can see, the window will be opened. So as you can see, all the lines have been executed from top all the way up to one line before the breakpoint, which is this one. So this line has been executed. And as you can see, it has defined an empty list, which is called X. And now the forthcoming line for running is this line, because it is highlighting this line. It means that we are going, if we press F8, we are going to run this line. So if we run this line, if I press F8, you can see now I is 1. And what does it mean? It means that it is iterating over this range of numbers. And remember that this range of numbers is 1 all the way up to 5, not 6, because this value is exclusive in the range function. So it is going to iterate over this range of numbers, and in the first iteration, I is equals to 1. And now we are going to append I times 2. We are going to double this number. So if we want to double 1, which is 2, we are going to append that to the X list. So we are going to append 2 to X list if I press F8. So let's press F8. You can see 2 has been appended to X list. And now the forthcoming line for running is this line. So if I press F8, you can see I is now 2. And we are going to append 2 times 2, which is 4, to the X list. Let's do it. And again, if I press F8, you can see I is 3. And we are going to append 3 times 2, which is 6, to X. And let's move forward. And now we can see I is equals to 4. And we are going to append 4 times 2, which is 8, to X. Let's do it. And now let's press F8. You can see I is 5. And we're going to append 5 times 2, which is 10, to this list. And as you can see, now we have finished the for loop. So if I press F8, you can see it goes outside the for loop because the for loop has been finished. And now the forthcoming line for running is line 6, which we are going to print the X variable, which is our list. So if I press F8, remember that the console is blinking. It means that something has happened in the console. So you can see that it has printed the X variable. So now once again, let's debug this code because we want to talk about something called variables panel. So after putting the breakpoint, I want to right click on the editor and click debug. And now we can see our X has been defined. And also if you look at this variables, you can see that this is the variables panel. And you can see that X is an empty list. And if we press F8, you can see now I is equal to 1. And here it shows I is equal to 1 also. So if I press F8 and go further, you can see that it shows the variables and their corresponding values as we debug the code. So now we can see I is 5 and X is this list containing 5 numbers. And now once again, because you want to talk about this calculator, which is called the evaluate expression, and also because you want to talk about watch list and etc. So let's restart this debug again. So let's stop that and let's run it again. But now let's talk about this evaluate expression and also watch list. So let's press F8 once again. So now suppose that someone which is not familiar with Python wants to know what are the values of range 1 all the way up to 6. So he wants to evaluate something in the middle of debugging, process. So he can press this calculator and here we can type your expressions. For example, here I want to simply see the values of range 1 all the way up to 6. So 1 all the way up to 6, and I want to, for example, see the values. So I pass that to a list, and if I press the evaluate button, you can see the result is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It means that the values of this range of numbers is 1 all the way up to 5. And as you can see, the second value is exclusive. And also I can use these variables in order to evaluate other expressions as well. Suppose that I want to calculate I times 2 and I want to evaluate that. So let's press evaluate, and you can see the result is 2 because now I is equal to 1, so I times 2 is 2. But now suppose that I want to, for example, track I times 3 in each iteration when I press F8 during the debug process. So in order to do so, I should add I times 3 to watch, and because I want to watch that variable, because I want to track that variable as we go further in debugging process. So after typing I times 3, you can see it says you should press Control Shift Enter to add this to the watches, and in order to watch that variable along the debugging process. So I press Control Shift Enter, and you can see now it has been added to watches. So that's it. So let's again, for example, add another thing to watch. So let's, for example, add I times 4, and let's press Control Shift Enter to add that as well to the watches. So let's close this, and if we press F8, you can see now I is 2. So because I is 2, I times 3 is 6, and I times 4 is 8. Now let's continue again. So I is 3, and as you can see, I times 3 is 9, and I times 4 is 12. And let's move on. So also remember that we can remove these variables from the watch list. In order to do so, we can use this minus sign, so in order to remove this, and also we can add the plus sign in order to add a new watch. So for example, suppose that I want to calculate I times, let's say 10, and I want to add it to watch list. So I click enter, and you can see I times 10 is 50. And also remember that I can use the minus sign in order to remove a watch variable from the watch list. And I can move the watch variable. So if I press this, you can see I can move it up. And if I press this, I can move it down. And also remember that you can use this field in order to evaluate expressions as well. So for example, let's evaluate list of range of 1 all the way up to 6. And I should press enter to evaluate expressions. So I press enter, and you can see the result is 1 all the way up to 5. That's it. And if you want to add something, so for example, let's consider I times 8. And if you want to evaluate expression, you can press enter. But if you want to add this to watch list, you can simply press Control Shift Enter, or also you can press this icon which says add to watches. And also if you want to delete this evaluate field, you can click on this and uncheck show evaluate expression field, so you can see it has been appeared. And also if you want to divide variables and watch variables, you can click on this and uncheck show watches in variables tab. So if I click on this, now we can see that this panel has been divided into 2 sections, the variables and watches. And if you want to restore that, you can simply click on this and check show watches in variables tab. So that's it. And finally, let's remove all these watches. So I click on this, and I want to remove this, and also remove this, and also remove this as well. And let's stop the debugging process. So that's it. But now let's talk about another example. So as you can see, we are appending to x I times 2. So as a matter of fact, we are doubling the I, and we are appending that to the x list. So let's define a function, and let's call it double, which takes a value as input, and in the output it is going to return a value times 2. And here, instead of using I times 2, I want to use the double function, and I want to pass I. So we are going to double I, and then we are going to append to x the double of I. So now let's put the breakpoints at this line, and let's debug the code. So I right click and press debug. So here, if I press F8, you can see I is equal to 1, and the double of 1 is 2, which is going to be appended to the x variable. So if I press F8, you can see 2 has been appended to x variable. And if I press F8 again, you can see I is equal to 2. But if I press F8 again, you can see the double of 2 has been appended to x. But here's a question. How can we go further? For example, here, when I'm pressing F8, you can see I is 3. And if I press F8 again, the double of 3 is going to be appended to x. I mean, 6 is going to be appended to x. But how can we go further, and how can we step into this function which we have defined and see what is the process of generating 6. So we want to go further and we want to step into our function and see what is happening inside that function. For doing so, I should click on this. You can see it says step into my code, and a step into means I'm going to step into every function and everything which I have written. So even functions, here's a function and I want to step into even functions and classes and etc. So let's do that. And now you can see that you're going to that function, and because I is equal to 3, then the value which has passed to the double function is 3, and the double function is going to return value times 2, which is 6. So let's click on step into my code, and you can see 6 has appended to the X list. And once again, let's click a step into my code. You can see I is now 4, and now we are passing 4 to the double function. So let's click on a step into my code. You can see value is 4, and we are going to return 4 times 2, which is 8, and we are going to append that to the X variable. That's it, and let's continue. I is equal to 5 and double of 5, so the value is 5, and we are going to return 5 times 2, which is 10, so 10 has been appended to X list. So that's it. Once again, you can see, and if I press it again, you can see because we have reached to the end of the program, the debug has been finished. So as you can see, there is a difference between stepping over and stepping into my code. Stepping into my code means I'm going to step even in functions, classes, and etc. But a step over doesn't mean that. A step over just step each line, and it is not going to step into functions, classes, and other stuff which I have written. But now let's talk about another example. As you can see, I have imported a random package which is used for dealing with random stuff. For example, like generating random numbers and those stuff. So here I have defined a variable, an empty list, which is called x, and I want to generate 5 random numbers between 1 to 6. So I'm using this random.randint. Randint stands for random integer number between 1 to 6. So I want to generate random integer numbers between 1 to 6, like rolling a dice, but I want to do this thing 5 times. So because of that, I'm using range of for I in range of 1 to 6. So as a matter of fact, I want to roll a dice 5 times, and I want to store the results in a variable, let's say called x. So let's define the breakpoints at this line, and let's right click on the editor and click on debug. Now let's press step into my code. So let's click on it. So I is equal to 1, and now you can see that a random number between 1 to 6 has been appended to x. And let's click on step into my code again. You can see I is 2, and again let's click on it, and you can see 2 has been added again to the x. And maybe you ask why we are not going into the random function, and the reason is because we are using something called a step into my code. So as you can see, random.randint is not my code. It is a code for another package called random. So if you want to even go further and step into other people's code, step into other packages code, then you should use another thing called a step into, not a step into my code. Generally a step into. So you can use this. So let's click on it. So I is at 3, and if I click on this, we can go further into the random package, and now you can see that we can go further and further. But if you want to exit this process, we can use the step out. So if you use the step out and again click step out, and now we can see that we have a step out from the random package. So that's it. So let's click on a step into my code, and now we can see 6 has been added to x. And let's again click on a step into my code. I is 4, now 5 has been appended, and I is 5, and 3 has been appended. That's it. So, and once again, if I click on this, because we have reached the end of the program, if I click on this, you can see the debug has been finished. So the difference between a step into my code and a step into is this, that the step into my code just steps into my code. I mean, the things that I myself have written, functions, classes, and etc. that I myself have written. But the step into is a general case which is going to step into my code and other people's codes as well. So as a matter of fact, a step into is a general case, and a step into my code is a special case of a step into, which is going to just step into my codes, not other people's code. but we can use a step into, which is a general case for step into your code and a step into other people's code. By saying other people's codes, I mean other packages. Now, once again, let's talk about this example, and now let's define multiple breakpoints. So let's define a breakpoint at line 4, and another breakpoint at line 7, and another breakpoint at line 9. But now, in order to explain another thing, let's debug the code again. And now we can see something is happening in the console. We can see a statement 1 has been executed. And now this time, suppose that I want to jump from this breakpoint to the other breakpoint. And I don't want to step over each statement. So I want to jump suddenly from this breakpoint to another breakpoint. In order to do so, I can simply press the step out icon. So I can click on this. And as you can see, a statement 3 and a statement 4 has been executed, and now we are in this breakpoint. And once again, if I want to skip these middle statements between these two breakpoints, I can simply click on this step out, and if I click on this, you can see now statement 6 has been executed. Now we are in this breakpoint. So again, let's click on a step out, and you can see that a statement 7 and a statement 8 has been executed as well. So if you remember, I've told you not to put the breakpoint at the first line, and I've told you that I will talk about the reason. And I think the reason is there is a problem with PyCharm, because for example, if you check out this site, you can see that this problem has reported. And also, for example, if I want to use the DataSpell, which is another IDE by Jetbrains, and for example, if I put the breakpoint at the first line, let's put that in the first line. And if I want to debug this code, so let's do it. You can see we don't encounter with any problem, and we can simply use a step over to print the statements, and there is no problem. But if we do the same thing in PyCharm, so if I right click and debug this code, you can see suddenly it starts to run the code and the debug process doesn't work properly. So I think this is the problem of PyCharm, that you shouldn't put the breakpoint at the first line. Also, I have checked this code in VS Code, and there was no problem in VS Code as well. But I think this is the PyCharm's problem. So for example, we can fix the problem by printing an empty line. So now if I debug the code, you can see I don't encounter with any problem, and I can use F8 in order to debug the code. So that's it.